Welcome to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. We want to encourage, equip, and connect those with a passion to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. Student ministry can be a lonely place. You might even feel like you're the only one in your church or community that cares about students. Well, know this, you're not alone. People all across the country are engaging Gen Z and care deeply about the spiritual direction of these young men and women. Whether you're full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer, if you have a heart for students, this is the place for you.
Welcome back to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. We're thrilled that you're here today as we continue the conversation about student ministry. Now, on today's podcast, I have with me my friend Chris Vines.
Hey, Dan. Good to be back.
Hey, Chris. We are talking about a big, powerful word. Actually, it's a small, powerful word. It's no. For the last couple of weeks, we've talked about saying no just in general, about the importance and power that can have in our lives, and really the importance of protecting ourselves, long-term ministry, and kind of the list goes on there. But then last week, we talked about saying no to the parents that are connected with our student ministry. And today, well, we want to say no again. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But before we do, I want to say thank you to our podcast partner. They're all about saying yes to your students. So we want to encourage you to check out cbc.edu. That's Central Baptist College of Conway, Arkansas. Annually, they host our BMA of Arkansas meeting. That may change in the years to come. I know that there's some that want to move it to other places in the state, but I just love CBC and I love being on their campus. We'll enjoy that. And so we're recording right before our state meeting. I have to give a report. I believe that our guest is actually going to be sharing the annual message unless he has found a way to get out of it. And so we're thrilled to have Dr. Clif Johnson on our podcast. Clif is Chris's pastor. And so they're sitting in the same room, going to be sharing some things. They work together every day. And so we're thrilled to have Clif on the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Clif.
Hey, guys. Thanks.
Clif serves, but I think probably the most important is that local church role of being. And so we wanted to talk about this big idea of saying no to your pastor. And that can be challenging. It can be all sorts of, exciting is not the right word. It could be anxiety filled. Let's put it that way. But there are times. So we want to talk about that today, to chime in on that and answer some other questions about that. So Clif, you've been on the podcast before. We've talked a little bit, but how long have you been?
I've been in ministry, formal ministry, about 24, probably either 98 or 99 is whenever I got started in it. So yeah, a little.
It's sometimes difficult. I always gauge, okay, when did I surrender to the ministry?
Mm-hmm.
When was my first position, or what started on that path? And it all kind of blurs together after a while. Now I'm at the place it's just 30 plus, it's just a long time.
Yeah.
So, well, you know that this is a podcast for the full-time, part-time, bivocational student ministry worker. And, I don't know if we've asked this question before. Have you served as a youth?
Yeah. In fact, that's where it actually at Temple, kind of informally, when we were in between youth pastors, and me and college guys kind of filled in some spots there for a little while. My first official position was at First Baptist Church in Perryville, Arkansas. I followed the infamous Cody at First Baptist there as youth pastor. So yeah, I was there for 3 years, I think.
3 years. Did you leave there and then start as a senior pastor or a lead pastor?
No, I left there and went to seminary.
Okay.
And after that's whenever I came to Hope, and I was in that second chair position in Hope. I was associate pastor for a couple of years here as well.
Great.
Also got to try your hand at a little bit of administrative work at the school, right?
Yeah. Whenever I first came here, I was the principal. The school was tons smaller than what it is now, and so there wasn't near as much administration stuff going on as it requires now. But yeah, I did.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Paddle.
No, there was a paddle in the room. I never used it. It was an intimidation factor type thing.
You
Yeah.
just use your belt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back in the day when I was in elementary school, I remember the paddles took all sorts of forms. Some of them had holes drilled in them. I mean, they were the Board of Education.
Mm-hmm.
That was the old days of corporal punishment. But anyway, today we want to say, what does it mean to say no to the lead pastor? And so you've served in that second chair role. You have been involved with that before, Clif. And so, Chris, why don't you share some of the questions?
Sure. Well, one of the first questions I have is, you just shared being in the second chair in Perryville and then here. Can you ever remember a time when you needed to say no to the pastor? And I know that's kind of a tough one because it kind of crosses a lot of different contexts, but is there anything that stands out?
I can't ever remember a time to where I was asked to do something and me saying, no, I'm not going to. And I think we'll get into this a little bit more, but I've been fortunate enough to, in my positions, the hierarchy of was there, but the functional aspect of it was more and so you do this or else. It was, hey, what are you targeting or going about something in this way?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of how, that's when I think, I mean, that was so long ago. It is hard for me to remember, but that's what I do remember, is that there was collaboration more than there was direct orders to.
So with that, when you think about your role now,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because you've been a senior pastor for 18 years,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? So I think I already know the answer to this, but how do you view your role as senior pastor in regards to the vision of the church, but also in leading other pastors in the church?
Yeah. So I view my role as the one responsible, setting the pace, what is the church? Why are we here? What are we supposed to be accomplishing in terms of, that as well? I think my responsibility is to be able to see who we have in the church and the giftings that are within the church, and then to craft and to direct ministries along. And so me saying that I'm responsible for it, though, doesn't mean that I'm the only one that gets to speak into it. I'm that at the end of the day, that responsibility, I want to hear not just from other pastors, but I want to hear from other people in the church as well as to what they think, as to what they're seeing in the different ministries that are going on. And so I want to take all of that into mind. Mm-hmm. And then I want to bring it to you. I want us to sit down and talk, with Jack, our and other key leaders in our church. And so it is very much an elder type situation. But as the senior pastor, in the setup that we have, I view myself as the one responsible for it. Mm-hmm. What was the second part of that question? That was just the vision part. What was the?
Yeah. So, I mean, and how that relates to you, I think you answered it, but how it relates to you leading and managing, if you will, other pastors.
I think in leading other pastors, it's in that collaboration. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I see. Here's what I see as weaknesses within the church. Here's what I see as strengths. How do we fix the weakness? Leverage our strengths. I think, and so to get your input on that, to get Jack's input on that, I even go so far as to ask our personnel committee, because oftentimes with our person, they hear from the more than we do, just in casual conversations and different things like that. They're the ones that are in the Sunday school classes, in the life groups, when we're not around, when people might feel more comfortable talking about what's going on. And so I lean on their input as well in gaining that information and how we are to move forward. Yeah. And I think in the leadership and working with staff is to make sure that we don't get outside the vision with unnecessary things that don't fit who we are as a church.
Yeah.
So
in the last couple of weeks, as we've talked about saying no, what you just said has come up a couple of times, because it's probably because you're the one who taught me this, but the way that I think about saying no goes back to a vision, the vision of the church, but also the values of the church.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't fit,
Mm-hmm.
if something's being asked of me or of us that doesn't fit within our vision as a church and the values that we as a church have,
Right.
that becomes an easy no.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, it gives us a reason. But do you think in those lines as well?
I try to. I catch myself moving outside that sometimes when something is easy. And so I do have to remind myself, no, this is the makeup of who we are, and this off track. This is going to get us distracted type of things. And so, yeah, I would like to think that I'm always on those train tracks, but I'm absolutely not always on those.
I understand. Because I feel like sometimes I am on those train tracks, and then and so that's
so that's the pastor telling the second chair no.
Yeah, exactly. That's not this conversation. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that.
Yeah.
So no, but that does bring into bring us into another question, I think, and just the relationship that the other pastors, myself in this situation,
right.
And then of course we have our music pastor Jack. But your relationship with us, our friendship, I guess what you ask of me, what you expect of me, and how we go about relationship.
Yeah, so I think bringing this topic up, how to say no to your, is awfully dangerous.
That's why I'm doing it on a podcast.
Yeah. in the public forum, yeah. But I think it's so needed, and I want to commend you guys for being willing to even broach the subject, because I think it makes, whatever you call the head pastor, senior pastor, executive, whatever it is, it forces them to think about, this very thing. And are you a person that someone can say, and how do you view your position from the sense of the attitude? And so I think this is a great topic, and I think senior pastors, it should cause them to think, am I looking out for the best interest of my staff and for the church, and not just myself? And so I think all of the senior pastor have to reflect on. So in terms of relationship, what I think is important, I think this is absolutely another staff person being able to say no to, in the hierarchical structure, I think there has to be developed from both sides. So how that would affect, our relationship is, I need to know what's going on. I need to know about your family. I need to know what age your kids are, and just whenever I had kids that age, and the time demands, and just the different struggles, and just what life was like. And the other thing, like what's unique, maybe it's not unique about ours, as far as the church, Jack is part-time. And so I've got to keep that in mind as well, as far as the time, what I'm asking of. And is a fundamental thing that has to be by the, I think it has to be pursued by the, in order to get in. Whenever I ask you to do something, I am aware of what's going on with you personally. I am aware of what's going on with you in terms of your family and the rhythms that your family keeps. And so when I come and ask you something that maybe it's not a part of the job description, that's just, yes, this is obvious, you need to, I'm aware of all the other factors going on, and I can come to you and I can say either, hey, I know you've got this, and this is going on, but this is what I'm asking you to do is after these. And where I think the reciprocal relationship comes in is, and my family rhythms, and my family structure, and what's going on in the church family that I may be dealing with, that I need to push something off my plate onto your plate that's an immediate, it just needs to be taken care of. And so I think one of the things that is that I can come to Chris and I can say, hey, I need you to do this. And if I use those words, I need you, it's going to have to be pretty significant going on in area for you to, because you know that I'm not just going to say, hey, I don't want to do this, and I've got all the time in the world to do it. I just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
You do it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen without relationship. That doesn't happen without trust. If that relationship is not there, and I come and say, I need you to do this, I think that's where tension in staff relationships develops, because you don't know if you can say no to me or not without risk of something happening as far as status in the authorities' eyes.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I think the relationship is the key element in this thing.
And, and none of that happens, relationship, friendship, trust, all that. None of that happens without time spent.
Right.
Right. And so that goes back to something else, that Dan and I've talked about a lot in just in the course of this podcast, is the importance of, if you can, be in one spot for a length of time, so in other words, I would say, you and I, well, obviously we know each other a lot better now than we did the first 2 years of ministry.
Sure.
And that's just important to remember, that it takes time to build that trust and to build that type of rapport. Well, I don't want to go rogue too far on some of these questions, but I'm curious because, we've got people that listen to this that haven't known each other like you and I have for almost a decade, haven't served alongside each other for almost a decade. And maybe they're new in ministry. They're in a new position. It's maybe their first position, and they're trying to get to know their senior pastor, the pastor that's over them, that's been there for a length of time. Do you have any just quick suggestions in terms of how to go about doing that?
So I think even before, the process can begin even before you take a job. Like if you're being interviewed or you're interested in a particular, job that has a senior pastor in it, I would ask for time to talk to, if there's other staff members, talk to other staff members on that staff, and just see what the dynamic of the relationship is. And even maybe all the staff people, just to kind of see what the dynamic is. If you're the only staff member or the first one being brought on, it makes it a little bit more difficult. But I would ask questions like, I would try to find out what their interests are. Not that you have to have the same interest in them. You and I have different interests, but that's just the way you get to know them. I would also find out what books they're reading and try to read the same books, not all the same books, but just be in the same vein of ministry relatedness.
Yeah. Some of the books that you read have really big words.
Yeah. I just skip over those.
Oh, okay.
I learn how to pronounce them, and I'll throw them out in conversations every now and then.
Yeah.
I have no idea what they mean.
Okay.
But I'm just,
Sorry, I interrupted your thought.
Yeah. You bifurcated my thought right there. So now I've got two different things going.
Yeah. Great.
So
I skipped over that word.
But I think you just, you want to get to know your pastor. And so I would make those, try to find out what they're reading and ask them about that stuff that they're reading. What did you think about this? I found this interesting. I didn't quite understand this, or I don't agree with this. Help me understand this type of thing. Yeah. I think those are the types of things that cultivate a ministry relationship.
Yeah. Talking about some of this starts before you ever even get hired or brought on in a position at the church. I still remember one of the first conversations you and I had. And it wasn't even really formal. It was more informal, but we got right to kind of philosophy of ministry. We sat down and we talked about what your ideas were in terms of the church and where you saw the church going and just how you thought about doing ministry. And we keep talking about that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
And I think you and I would both agree that philosophically we're on the same page. And I think that's important. That was important before we ever started working together.
Right.
So there's that. But then there's also kind of what you're saying, a difference in personal preference.
Yeah.
And so you probably see some things and have seen some things that I've done over the years that you don't necessarily prefer. In other words, if you were to do it, maybe you would do it differently.
Right.
And so our preferences and how we go about certain things would differ a little bit. And you've always been very gracious to me. And I try to ask questions like that sort of thing. But does that affect saying yes, saying no when it comes to, making those distinctions philosophically versus what we prefer, our preferences?
Yeah. So I think this is the next, probably most important thing after the relationship aspect is to be on the same page philosophically. if we're on the same page philosophically, if we have the same understanding of what the Word of God is and how the church is supposed to function, I can differ on the preference. We don't have to have the same preferences, but if we have different philosophies, then if you and I have different philosophies, it makes it much harder for you to follow and to be on board, because those philosophies are taking us two different directions. Yeah. And so I think the philosophy aspect is more important than the preference. So just for an easy illustration, or like with Big Jack Daniels, he may choose a song that's not my preference. I don't like the tempo of it. I don't like the style of it. But our philosophy on worship is the same. And so that's just a matter of me to be able to say, hey, this song is scriptural and it's singable. I may not like it, but it fits within our philosophy. So my preference doesn't matter. Yeah. It fits within the philosophy. If it was just a little skewed scripturally, if it was unsingable, well, now we have a philosophical difference that I would have to address so that we could be on the same page moving forward. So I think philosophy is just the idea of what ministry is for and what our roles are supposed to be doing. If we're not on the same page there, then I think that person in the associate position is in trouble. Yeah. Is in trouble.
Yeah. Because your understanding, and I think it's a right one, is that when you say get on the same page, it's not to say that you're the final authority.
Right.
In all things. I mean, you submit to the Word of God and you use the word scriptural and being biblical, and hopefully every senior pastor is doing that and living and leading based off their convictions of Scripture. But if there is a philosophical difference, getting on the same page means for that guy in the second chair to get on the same page with the senior pastor.
Yeah, I think that's how we initially think of it. And I think this is where the relationship can be an aid. Yeah. Because you can come to me and ask, hey, why'd we do that? Why are we doing this? What's the reasoning behind this? And I'm not going to feel, well, initially I may be, but I'm not going to feel threatened by that. Like you're second guessing me. Yeah. I understand that you really want to know what's behind this and that you can challenge me in, okay, I understand that, or maybe I don't understand that, but how does that fit in with the overall of what we're trying to do? And so if that relationship is not there, then that becomes an attack. That becomes, you're not doing it the way I want it to be done. That becomes, I think I can do this better than you type of situation if the relationship is not there. Yeah. So once again, that relationship, that foundational layer sets the stage for being able to have philosophical discussions to where maybe you're sharpening me. Sure. And so yes, in the structure, it is, once again, I'm the one responsible. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that I can't be challenged and changed. And it just makes it so much easier if the relationship is there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say a quick word, like I think, and this almost should be, this should go without being said. But I think one thing that we learned within our culture today is that things need to be said, is that there's a proper way for me to question you in that. In other words, me doing it in the middle of whatever it is in public view is not the right time.
Not the right time.
Maybe it means knocking on your door on a Monday when things are not really amped up yet in the week, or just scheduling a time to meet. Right. In other words, there's a proper way of not challenging, but a proper way of asking those questions that would come across as, well, not threatening. Right. And would be for the mutual benefit of us, but also for the church. Yeah. One thing that just kind of pops in my brain in this difference between philosophy and preference is that, from a senior pastor, youth pastor relationship, what oftentimes we see philosophically different is the approach to how we do ministry. So for instance, a lot of times there's what I've always considered a 90s, early 2000s approach to doing youth ministry, which was very event driven. Right. And so sometimes a senior pastor and even a church has that expectation for a youth pastor.
Yes.
Hey, we expect you to do events. We expect you to draw crowds. We expect this.
The whole job description is pragmatic. It's based on that.
Yes. Yeah. And I think sometimes from a youth pastor perspective, especially the new generation of youth pastors that are coming in, is there's not that same philosophical approach to ministry.
Yeah.
In other words, I feel like there's a lot more depth.
Yeah.
In terms of wanting to study the Bible, wanting to preach and teach the Bible. And it's a move away from an event-driven youth ministry. And so those two ideas, those two philosophies clash.
Yeah.
And would you agree that it's important to deal with that prior to ever start working together? Or is that something that can be overcome?
Yeah, I mean,
what do you think?
I think so obviously if you can deal with it before, that's obviously the better thing. And I want to be clear, I think the desire is the same, and it's to reach people.
Yeah.
It's to reach people. And so I think the desire is the same. It comes down to how are we instructed in God's word to reach people?
Yeah.
And what's the vehicle that we want to, what's the scriptural vehicle that we're supposed to employ in that? And it not only becomes the pastor's philosophy and the student pastor's philosophy, but you're like in one of your positions of student ministry, it has to become parents' philosophy. And those are oftentimes in conflict, where the parents want the big events, they want the big bang type of stuff. Yeah. And so that becomes not a chore, but it becomes a task of both the pastor and the one over the student ministry to help guide the parents into, no, you're the real youth ministers. We're here to resource you. We're here to come alongside you, all that different type of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I do think that if that can initially be, if that conversation can happen, what does discipleship look like? And how do we, and there's nothing wrong with the events, but those can't be the central thing. At least in our philosophy, events are not the central thing, but we do events.
Sure.
And so just what role do they play in the overall ministry of student life? And here's what I think happens, or at least here's what happened in my ministry, is it went from big event to a more discipleship focus. So the shift happened mid-ministry with me. And I think that happens with everybody. Every minister is always getting better. Hopefully they're getting better. And so there's some paradigm shifts there. And then you've got to come to the senior pastor and say, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
And so I think those are conversations that most pastors are willing to have, think through, and help guide their staff through. Yeah. I would hope that they are.
Yeah, that's good. One paradigm shift that I'm foreseeing is I think we can reach people much better if we form a pickleball team.
Oh my gosh.
For the church. I won't let you say no yet, but just be thinking about that. So Dan, you haven't said anything in a while. Is there anything that you want to say before Clif tells me no?
Well, yeah, I might be saying no for Clif on that one, but no, I've loved this conversation today. We've been talking about navigating the no with your senior pastor and this idea of relationship, talking about philosophy. Clif, I know that there are some times when we need to speak up and say no. And so more like railroad tracks that we're going to say, okay, that we're not going to get off of this. So could you maybe help our listeners think about that? When are some specific times that they would say, hey, no to their pastor?
So you're talking about student ministry associate pastors saying no to their pastor.
Yes.
Yeah. I think specific times is when it doesn't pertain, when it falls outside the scope of their major responsibilities. So, I mean, Chris has told me no before. It didn't have anything to do with student ministry, family ministry. It had something to do with my ministry that is kind of tangent to the church. It was outside the church's scope of responsibility as well. I asked him, hey, would you be interested in doing this? And he just said, no, I wouldn't be interested in doing that. I wouldn't be interested in doing that right now. I was like, okay, And so I also think that there's a difference between no and not right now.
Yeah.
So this is such a tender issue here. It's such a touchy thing that I feel the burden for associate pastors, youth pastors, the weight of this, because they don't want to. Nobody wants to let anybody down. Mm-hmm. And when you tell your senior pastor no, it's not just that you feel like you're letting your senior pastor down. You feel like you're letting your church down. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times it may be that you're actually helping the church stay healthy. Mm-hmm. If you're healthy, the church is healthier. If we're not chasing so many rabbits, the church stays stronger and healthier. And so to answer your question specifically, Dan, I think the easier times to say no, to say not right now, or no, I don't think I can accomplish that, would be when what's being asked is outside of what your initial job description is. I also think that if every time you're being asked to do something that's outside your initial job description and you say no, I think then at that point, if you're doing that every time or the majority of the time, then I begin to question, are you a team player? Or are you just zeroed in on this one little area of the kingdom? And so I think there has to be some thought put into that. So yeah, it's a tough one.
It is. And I'll just say, because the instance that he just brought up, we don't have to go into the details of it, but I know exactly what he's talking about. It's kind of strange that he brought it up because it's one that I was actually thinking about bringing up in this conversation as just an example. But I'll just say this. I remember him asking me to do this particular something. And I knew that not that I needed, but that I wanted to say no to that. I just didn't want to do what he was asking me to do at that particular time. But I remember how difficult it was for me to actually say no.
Yeah.
Like, I think you text me that.
Yeah.
And then I was texting back, and it was one of those where I was like, I probably typed 7 different texts just to figure out how do I need to say no to this?
Yeah.
Because, and it wasn't, but I say that just as a show of what he just said, that there is a weight.
Yeah.
In other words, there's I felt the pressure, not that we were going to not be friends, but that, okay, what is this? Like, when I say no, how are you going to receive that? Mm-hmm. How are you going to think of me and think of my, this is just part of me and Clif knowing each other as well. One thing that Clif has always been good about is he doesn't tell me, like in that instance, he didn't tell me, hey, I need you to do this, because it wasn't in the scope of the church, right? But if he were to say something in the scope of the church, it would have been a completely different scenario. And he's trained me that way. And there's been times throughout, especially even early on, there's been times where he would bring opportunity to me. And that's really what that was.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that you absolutely needed me to do.
Right.
I know it would have been helpful for you. And for that reason, I wanted to help you, but I just knew I wasn't in a spot where I needed to say yes to that. But Clif gives me opportunity. And like what he just said, there's opportunities that I've turned down, but there's opportunities that I've said yes to, and I've been thankful for. And part of my thought process is, is Clif trying to teach me something in this? I really do think that way. And I don't know if he ever thinks that way, but I know that the opportunities that he's given me in the past have been opportunities to stretch me and to grow me in particular areas. And I think he has done that intentionally, because he's intentional in that way. But like he said, if I just keep shooting him down, if I just say no, well, eventually those opportunities are going to stop. Eventually, that will cause a little bit of a break in our relationship, our working relationship. So, but I want to just emphasize, like, that wasn't an easy no. It was difficult.
I think once again it goes back to relationship, and I know that one of the things that you've been heavy on lately over the last probably 2 or 3, 4 years is really focusing your life, really focusing what it is you do and how it is you do it. And so I knew that whenever you said no to that, and what was, it was actually kind of shocking to me, not because he said no to me, but because what I asked him to do was kind of in his lane. In terms of subject matter, but I also knew that he was trying to streamline is not the word, but to really focus, your energy and time spent. And so I knew whenever he said no to that, okay, his plate is full on what he needs to be doing. And this fell outside the scope of that. And so that's why I was like, okay, no big deal.
But it was also like one of those benchmarks in the gym. Honestly, it was kind of like, I remember, because again, you use the word weight. It's kind of like when you get up underneath a squat and you're like, man, I've never done this weight before.
Oh yeah.
And you go down and you do it. And so when you come back up from that, you realize, okay, I can say no.
Right. Yeah.
And so it didn't give me a sense of pride, but it really was a benchmark for me personally of saying that's something that I could have easily said yes to. I could have just played the game.
Yeah.
But personally it would have been, I don't think I would have been able to produce the content that was needed for that particular task in that moment. And so it was a personal win. But it was just one of those times. And so, but if you're a guy out there and if you resonate with this, you feel the weight of saying no, then you're not alone. You're not alone in that at all. And that weight continues even when the relationship is good, because I think one of the things that we both know is that we don't want to let each other down. We don't, we want to help each other. And that's always kind of default position that we're in. But we could talk a long time about this. Probably one of the last questions that I have on my mind is just, helpful resources. Are there any, and I know you could probably give a long list, but is there a book? Are there people that you like to listen to or read when it comes to this particular subject matter?
Yeah. So I'll give you 3 resources. One is Boundaries. I can't think of who wrote it. Do you know, Dan? Do you know who wrote that book?
Cloud?
Henry Cloud, maybe?
Henry Cloud, that's right. Yeah.
Boundaries. And this may be Henry Cloud as well. When People Are Big and God is Small.
That's Ed Welch.
And then also, I would recommend Humility by C.J. Mahaney, or also Andrew Murray. I think one has one called Humility as well. I think that's a good book. So those are the resources. Boundaries helps you set boundaries, helps you say no.
Yeah.
When People Are Big and God is Small is just almost a worldview type of thing. Mm-hmm. And then Humility, I think we all need to be reading about humility.
Well, I appreciate you being with us today, Clif, as we've talked about this, because it's not an easy subject, but it's one that we have to consider.
Sure.
In addition to the relationship and the respect and the philosophies, there are, of course, the obvious things that we haven't even talked about. If the pastor asks you to do something that's unethical, unbiblical, that is going to be harmful to you or to your family, always say no to that.
Absolutely.
But, and again, it goes without saying, but I wanted to say them because that's important to remember. Be ready to say no when it's appropriate. The subject of no is difficult. And whether you're saying that to help protect your ministry, whether you are saying that to a group of parents, to your deacons, to the elders, to the leaders, there are some times to do that. And hopefully you'll be able to navigate those situations a little bit better because of what we've talked about on this episode, as well as the previous two. And so, again, thank you for being on the podcast. Thanks for being a part of the conversation as we talk about student ministry. And we'll keep plugging away. We'll keep loving on students and saying no when we have to, because student ministry matters.
Thanks for listening to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. Get connected at studentministrymatters.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Student Ministry Matters. Until next time, keep up the great work with your students, because the work matters.